Welcome to Getting APIs to Work, to another episode of What Would the Web Do, as usual with Mike Amundsen. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just hanging in here, trying to stay out of the heat here in the Midwest, in the U.S. I'm hanging in.
That is not a problem I have here in Switzerland, but good for you, I guess. So what we want to do today is we want to look a little bit into how APIs scale, or how API landscapes scale within enterprises, and how API landscapes scale in general. And I think it's interesting because having a scaling problem always means also that you are successful, though, so that's right. A good thing. But you also need to deal with it. And one story that can get us started, how to deal with it, is around Google. And Google just yesterday started releasing their Google Enterprise API labeling that they're now using for APIs. So what is that about, Mike?
Yeah, so Google has this reputation for killing off APIs. Like, they run betas a long time and then they get rid of them. And I think Google, when they're dealing in this cloud space, they realize enterprises need something more than that. They need some assurances, some guarantees in some way. I know Amazon's talked a lot about this. Werner Vogels has this line. He says, we knew when we were doing our APIs, he was talking about the simple storage service, S3 buckets. We had to get it right the first time because we couldn't change that API once we released it to the public. So it looks like they're at Google, they're saying we're going to start labeling certain certain APIs as enterprise grade or something like that to kind of signal information. Now, I think that's a good idea. And that's a sign, I think, of maturity. You've talked about labels quite often, right? You've got a series of presentations and some write-ups on the importance of labeling APIs for information, right?
Yes, it's something I find interesting. I think it's almost like a sign of a mature market, that if a market of products is mature enough that people start having enough choice and enough, also they depend enough on the products that they want to have some help in choosing products and selecting products, then labels can help a lot, right? It's like the safety labels that we find on equipment, the food labels that we find on the food we buy, and that helps us a lot to really understand more easily what it is that we're getting. And oftentimes the labels also come with some actual enforcement. That's a different story then. But even if they don't, if they're just self-declared labels, I think they already are pretty helpful. And I think this is, like I said, just another sign that the API landscape, so to speak, in general is maturing to the point where people just say, yeah, sure, we use APIs, but we also really need to depend on them. So help us to feel a little bit better about your APIs.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with several companies in developing their API programs, in this idea of sort of company-wide or company certified or guaranteed labeling is a pretty repeatable feature in this maturity scale, for the very reasons that we were just talking about. Safety and assurance and compliance. I think that's another thing. You see this word come up a lot. They're compliant APIs and so on and so forth. So I think that's definitely a sort of a level up. This is sort of a path. You start with some APIs, then you realize managing them is a bit of a challenge, and then you realize that not only managing them, but other people using them is a challenge as well. So this is sort of a path, and I'm actually very much encouraged by this idea. But where does this sort of model, this path, this maturity thing come from? I mean, is this something that's new, or have we already kind of had this, for a long time?
I think this was part of the motivation why we wanted to do like this bit today, right? Where, to me, the interesting parallel is like when the web started, let's say in the mid 90s, maybe.
Yeah.
Early 90s, right? Yeah. So I had a lot of courses. So I gave like 2-day courses on how does the web work, and a lot of companies had no idea, right? And it was interesting to see how the success of the web, initially it was not successful, and then it started being successful, and you got these like pockets of competence in the organization, right? Somebody sets up a web server and they start understanding how it works, and then they put some stuff on it, and then they need to put more stuff on it, and then the question becomes, do we really only have one web server? It seems to take a long time to get anything done, because it's kind of a very bottleneck kind of thing. And I think then when the web really became the one information resource, it became clear that it has to scale in a different way. You can't just say, there is one place in the enterprise that does the web stuff and everybody gets their web stuff done by that one place. And I think that is the interesting story of this kind of maturity and scaling that we also see in APIs now. That we also had this initial wave of, well, somebody sets up a gateway, everybody publishes the API through this gateway, somebody sets up a portal, everybody needs to publish the API in that portal. And I think we start feeling a little bit of the growing pains within the confines of that model. And to me, that is the interesting part, right? Is that it's a sign of success, but it also may become a sign that we have to start doing some things differently.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of this. So going all the way back to what you're talking about web page and web page growth, I remember working in organizations where they would want to do a redesign of their site. Well, when they redesign their site, they might break a lot of links that people have looked for. This is that sort of certified, web page kind of experience. So a lot of organizations started to institute their redirect services, where if you were using the old link, you would get redirected to the new link to make sure that you don't break relationships. If I work for a government office, right, I have to find the right form. I have to find the right document. I have to be able to download something. If I just get a bunch of 404s, this gets problematic. So we realized in just the plain information web that we had this level, like you say, of maturity and responsibility. We had to kind of scale up. And that gets to be a problem as more and more people contribute. There were style guides for these web pages, and you had to use certain bits and pieces on each page to make sure that you followed the guide. And then we're sort of paralleling that same thing in the API space. So I think this labeling, again, just sort of reminds us that we're really kind of repeating, the series is what would the web do? It's sort of like, what did the web do, and how we can learn from that. So I think we're definitely on that path. Now, you mentioned something else that I thought was really important, and that is central. Like early on, we thought we could just all put it on one server. We'd have all our web pages on one server, or that we would have to all submit the content to the same place. And then early on in the API space, we thought it's all got to go through one gateway, or it all has to be approved through one spot. And I think maturity and scaling successfully means we have to kind of think differently about that problem as well, right? We can't have it just one bottleneck through which everything goes, right?
I don't think so. And I think you start seeing that this model is definitely bursting at the seams in quite a number of places. And as you know, right, X-Way, like we say open everything. That's our tagline, right? That kind of implies that, probably don't open everything through this just one little thing. And then the question is, like, how do you manage that? And I think this is really this interesting model of what you see also when we look at the web, maybe in the corporate space today, where it's also this idea that everything that you have for the enterprise is published on like the enterprise web server and made available there. I think this model is long gone. Yeah. At least I don't really see it. I mean, they may have like a little part of content, right, where they want this to be highly polished and whatever, but that's a tiny bit of what they have. So that's not really all of it. And then the other stuff mostly just, I think, lives on a whole bunch of different websites and servers. And most importantly, what they then have is some way of at least having a catalog of those so that, okay, if I need information about this, it's over here. If I need information about that, it's over there. If you're good at it, you actually start interlinking it, right? So you use links, and you can do that with APIs as well. So I think stuff still works, but the way that you manage it and the architecture behind it just is different. And then the question also is, how do you make it discoverable? And I was wondering when I was thinking about this episode today. So I know that for the longest time there were like these Google appliances. So you could have basically Google working in your enterprise, right? And it would be like a machine that they would put into your enterprise, and they wouldn't access it.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to crawl your own stuff, because well, building a Google quality crawler is pretty hard, you would just buy such an appliance. Do they still exist? Do you know that?
I don't know. That's a good question, and I do remember that. I remember that idea. You could sort of have your own Google, right? It was you would buy the physical machinery. It wouldn't just be software either. You'd rack this thing into your system, and it would crawl and use all of the the algorithms and all the other things to help you create a searchable space. And I remember I may even still on my own webpage, I might have a customized Google search box, which is supposed to, they're supposed to focus on crawling my material. I don't have an appliance. But that's a really, really good point, because I think one of the other things that happens when you start to scale out and up is when you decentralize the authoring and all those other things, you need to create more visibility and more observability into things. And that's what the appliance does. That's what Google does. So in the same scale for APIs, as we're building larger APIs, I know a lot of companies, they actually have a manually curated registry or a manually curated portal of digital, APIs, digital assets. But that's going to be giving away to automatically sort of Googled appliance style of finding of all these APIs and services. I think that's another level of scaling we're going to have to be prepared for. Can we really discover all the APIs in our company? I know most companies I deal with can't.
Yes, that is a very good question. And even though I always ask this question, it's like, what's your visibility into your own APIs? And of course, everybody says, wonderful, we know everything. And then I say, yeah, that's for the APIs that you have created in the last 6 or 12 months. But like in terms of production traffic on your systems, right? Yeah. What's your visibility there? It's like, oh, well, that's a different story. Yeah. And so I think that's really interesting. And thanks, by the way, for using the O word, observability. Right? Yeah. So I think there's a good reason why this word has become relatively popular in the recent past, right? Because I think we do get closer to this point where it becomes more and more important to be able to know what's going on. And probably that approach might be your best bet or the most effective way of doing it simply.
Yeah, I really think that as you decentralize responsibility, you need to really raise up that observability. That's kind of a pattern, I think. And I think that's a pattern for any kind of scaling of any kind. If you want to manage automobile traffic, right? I don't manage the individual cars. I look at the traffic patterns, right? If you want to manage the airplane schedules, if you want to manage shipping material around, you really have to have observability into where the shipping liners are and all these other things. So I think that's another sort of maturity element in all of this. And I think that's something that we're going to have to see we're going to have to see some shifts in not only the way we think about this, but also the way we architect things. So when I start a service, maybe that service has to self-register. We talk about, self-service integration or self-service deployment. We may have to start thinking about self-service registration and creating our own kind of DNS for services. There may be a whole new set of things that helps us to start to scale the enterprise API in ways that we're really just kind of touching on.
There are definitely, I've seen some API programs and platforms where this kind of what you just said, this registration into some form of catalog is just one, like you have to do it. If you don't do it, like you don't get past the tests. That's just one of the tests, right? Like, yeah. Do you register? And if you don't, then, well, you fail that test. So yeah, I think that is definitely starting to become a pattern where these things become either automated or you just have to architect things in the right way. So yep. The way I try to put it always is to tell people, look, this space is becoming more and more complex, but that's, to some extent, that's a good thing. You just have to manage that complexity. You have to be aware of it. But if you try to remove it, you basically, you restrict everything so badly
Yeah.
that you take all the good out of it, right? So that's probably not the best way to go.
That's a really, really good point too. I think that's another thing about scaling enterprise APIs, which is you have to realize that you're holding back the ocean with a broom. You can't if you get this if you try to get this.
I didn't know that one. I like that one.
No, really, you don't like
Is
that?
it like no, I didn't know it. It's great.
Yeah, you can't do it, right? Like things. That's when you get shadow IT. There's also the other things going on. So you need to start rethinking, and that what you mentioned, which is to have the CI/CD pipeline test case say, like, I don't have any evidence that you register at our portal when you're up and running, and so on and so forth. You know, that's where governance works well. Governance works well during that design and build, and then runtime is mostly observability and prevention, right? So I think this is another thing that people have to start thinking more and more about. What can we automate? What can we do in the build or the design phase to make it easier to be able to see things in the runtime phase? And that's another part of scalability of your API program, I think.
Yeah, I think for the API space, we're really now at a point where it seems to me, at least in some organizations, it's really taking on a visibility and a velocity that people start realizing that, hey, we need to, you know, level up our game here a little bit. And I'm hopeful. So I'm hopeful that, you know, the whole labeling thing maybe will gain some steam. That would be cool.
Well, people need to go back and look at this. You've been talking about this for several years. What, 4 years at least, right? I think
yeah, for a little while.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think
it was
mostly.
Yes, we'll see. I mean, one of the difficulties with all the labeling stuff, and I think we know all this from real life as well, right? So if I go to the supermarket here in Switzerland, for example, I don't know how many labels there are for organic things.
Yeah.
And, you know, because everybody knows people are willing to pay more if something says organic or some variation of that, right? So they just create labels and slap them on, and then you have no idea what that means, how it is enforced, right? And so I think labeling also only becomes really valuable when it has a lot of trust behind it and transparency. And I think that is actually the hard part. So I think that the technical aspect of labeling really is not all that hard, maybe a little bit, but I think mostly it's a question of trust and visibility, so that people actually start trusting the labels.
Yeah, so it's really social, right? It's socialization, it's cultural.
Yes.
The good news is enterprises can actually control that trust level and socialization much better, right? So I think we'll see these labels appearing at the smaller scale first successfully. So Google might be able to be successful at doing this. But that's, you know, it's going to be a real challenge. Just having the label isn't enough, right? Yeah.
And I mean, Google also is almost in a unique position there, because Google is such a well-known brand that it's probably enough if Google just says, you know, we say this is a good label, and then most people say that's probably true because it's Google.
Probably true.
Probably true. But I think there's not that many other organizations that kind of have this kind of, you know, market dominance that anybody would care if they said this is our enterprise label, and everybody would say, what?
So that's a good lesson. Again, we're kind of repeating things that the web did, and we've got still lots of room to scale.
Lots of room to scale. I think and it's interesting. I think we do see these signs showing up, and that to me always means that we're probably still in a space that has room to grow and that is growing, and that is good and interesting, and I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent, very good.
Mike, thanks a lot for joining as usual. It's a pleasure.
It's great to talk with you always. Good to see you, Eric.
Yes, next time we'll talk about maybe something looking forward again. But I really like these history things, and I know that you enjoy them as well. I hope some of our viewers like it as well.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.